The last thing my father ever said to me was, "When she dies, don't go back to the house. Promise me." I didn't. I hung up the phone. I told myself he was paranoid, bitter, broken by a divorce he'd never recovered from. And now, 17 years later, I was back, standing in the living room of the very house he warned me about, with my dying mother asleep in the next room, and no one left to explain why my childhood still felt like a question mark I was afraid to answer. If you've ever felt like your memories were tampered with, if your family made you doubt what you saw, what you felt, or who you are, then you're not alone. Hit the like button and subscribe. This is the kind of story families beg us never to tell. My name is Claire, and this is how I uncovered the truth about the woman who raised me, the lies she planted in my mind, and the father I was taught to hate but should have listened to. The hospice nurse was waiting by the door when I arrived. "She sleeps most of the day," she said gently, motioning me inside. "Minimal pain. We're just managing comfort now." Comfort. A strange word in this house. It didn't belong here. Everything looked exactly like it did when I left at 16. Stiff lace curtains, a grandfather clock that never chimed, and glass figurines that watched you from every corner. Nothing had changed. Except the air. It was heavier now. The nurse handed me a set of keys, hospice instructions, and a small bottle of morphine. "You'll hear things," she said. "Just remember, her mind's not what it used to be." I nodded. But I already knew. It was never her mind I feared. It was her memory. That night, I walked into my old bedroom and almost turned back around. The wallpaper was still the same, clouds and stars, and the bedspread still smelled like baby powder and mothballs. There was a box on the bed, labeled, "For Claire," in my mother's handwriting. Inside, I found a stack of photographs, a worn leather-bound journal, and a cassette tape. The tape was unlabeled. The journal's first page was dated April 2002. I was 6 years old then, the year my father walked out. The handwriting was neat, cold, precise. Claire's defiance continues. She refuses to say her nightly prayers. David undermines discipline by comforting her afterward. I warned him. Next time, I'll handle it alone. I read that line 5 times. Then again. And suddenly, I couldn't remember if I had really cried that night, or if I'd just been told that I did. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the floor with the journal open, flipping pages faster and faster, scanning phrases like, "Claire lied again. The devil is creeping in. David tried to sneak her medicine. I flushed it. I don't need his cowardice in this house. He's making her weak. I won't allow it." I slammed the book shut. This wasn't just documentation. This was erasure. She hadn't just rewritten my father's role in our lives. She'd rewritten mine. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the floor creak. The sound of slow, uneven footsteps. I froze. The morphine was on the counter. I hadn't given her any yet. Then why was she walking? I stepped into the hallway. No one. But at the end of the corridor, I saw it. My father's old study. The door was ajar. And just beyond it, a dim light flickered. "When she dies, don't go back to the house." He didn't say it out of bitterness. He said it because he knew she built this house to keep her version of the truth alive. And now that she was dying, the truth was trying to claw its way out. The study was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it was just me who had grown, taller, older, sharper around the edges. I hadn't set foot in this room since the week my father left. I'd been 6. I remembered being told it was off limits. "Daddy's space," she said. "And you don't need to know what he hides in there." Back then, it sounded sinister. Now, it sounded like a warning meant to protect me. The desk was covered in dust. The drawers were locked. But on top sat something out of place, a small, portable cassette recorder. The kind therapists and pastors used in the early 2000s. My father had always kept one in his briefcase. This one had a tape inside, and it was labeled this time. I pressed play. "David." "Okay, Claire. You can tell me. You said you had another dream?" "Claire. M.H.M. "David. What happened in it?" "Claire. Mommy was in my room. But not her. She was tall, and her eyes were wrong. David. What did she say to you? Claire. She said daddy lies. That I'll forget soon. That it's better not to ask things. David. You won't forget, sweetheart. I promise. And I won't lie to you. Okay. Claire. Okay. David. You're doing really good. This tape is just for us. In case someone tries to change what you remember later. I paused it. I felt like the floor had dropped beneath me. This wasn't just a parent-child moment. It was documentation. Protection. He knew, even back then, that she was trying to shape my memories. And that one day, I'd need a map back to the truth. I played the rest. David, if anything happens, I want you to remember this. You were never crazy. You were never wrong. You were loved. And if they tell you otherwise, come back here. To this room. And I'll help you remember. I stared at the recorder in my hands, realizing something horrifying. This tape wasn't hidden from me. It was left for me. I tore open every drawer, rifled through stacks of faded notebooks, tax documents, church records, looking for more tapes, more journal entries. Anything that could tell me how much he knew, what he tried to do. In the back of the lowest drawer, beneath a folder labeled sermon drafts, I found something strange. A piece of wood paneling loose. I pulled at it. Behind the drawer wall was a narrow cavity. And inside, wrapped in tissue paper, a photo. It showed my father, my mother, and me. I couldn't have been older than 5. We were standing on the porch of this very house. But something was off. My father looked thin, hunched. His arm around me was rigid, not warm. And in my mother's hand, nearly hidden behind her back, a syringe. The air in the room turned thick, unbreathable. I sat back against the desk and stared at the photo. I'd always believed he left, that he chose to walk away. But what if he didn't? What if he was pushed? What if he was drugged? What if he never left at all? That night, I didn't sleep in my childhood bed. I slept in the study, next to the cassette recorder, next to the truth that was slowly, finally, starting to speak louder than the lies. I visited her the next morning, not because I wanted to, because I needed answers, and she was the only one still alive who could give them. The bedroom where my mother lay dying was bathed in soft light, the curtains half drawn. It was the same room she used to lock me out of as a child. The one I imagined held secrets like monsters in closets, shadows that never stayed still. Now she was small, shrunken even. Her hair had thinned to wisps of white, her cheeks sunken. The powerful voice that once made me cower in church pews was barely a whisper now. And yet, something in her presence still made my chest tighten. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before she noticed me. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting, then narrowed. Claire, she rasped. No warmth, no smile, just recognition, calculation. You came. I didn't come for you, I said, voice cold. I came to understand what the hell happened in this house. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Not shame. Not regret. More like amusement. She coughed, a thin thread of saliva catching on her lip. I grabbed a tissue from the nightstand and handed it to her. She took it without thanks. You always were dramatic, she murmured. Just like your father. I stiffened. He didn't leave, did he? Her lips twitched. That's not a simple question. No, I said. It really is. You've had 17 years to think about the lie. Try telling the truth for once. She looked past me, toward the window, then closed her eyes. He left because he was weak. Because he wouldn't stand up to what needed to be done. Because you were drugging him? Her eyelids fluttered. You used medication to sedate him, I said. There are photos, a journal, recordings. You rewrote history and told me he was dangerous. But you were the one doing the damage. Silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the space between us. Finally, she opened her eyes again. And when she spoke, her voice was clear, measured, the same way she used to speak from behind the pulpit when she guest taught Sunday school. I kept this house together, she said. I protected you from a man who would have filled your head with sin. He wanted you to question everything: faith, obedience, order. He would have made you soft, vulnerable. And when I confronted him, he made you his pawn. I couldn't allow that.
Især det her.
You turned me against him. I saved you, she snapped, suddenly animated. He was trying to take you from me, Claire. The way men always take. Your trust. Your purity. Your mind. You kept tapes, I whispered. Therapy recordings. Conversations. You knew I'd come back eventually, and you left breadcrumbs you thought I'd follow. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. Not for you. For me. So I wouldn't forget why I did what I did. I stepped closer to the bed, suddenly aware of how frail she looked. How powerless. And yet, she still terrified me. Because deep down, I knew she'd never question what she did, not even now, with death hovering inches from her throat. You destroyed Dad, I said. And you ruined me in the process. She closed her eyes again, her face softening. And then, in the quietest voice I'd ever heard her use, she said, he destroyed himself. I walked out, but not before I grabbed the small, metal lockbox from her nightstand, the one she kept her cross necklace in. She used to call it her private altar. Inside were the last pieces of the puzzle I needed: a folded document with my name and her handwriting, a list of former pastors and counselors she'd cleansed from her life, and another tape. This one labeled, Dr. Henson, Memory Recall, Session 3, Claire, age 9. I sat in the study that night and listened. Dr. Henson. Okay, Claire. Let's talk about last week. You mentioned a dream about your father again. Claire. He was yelling this time. But it wasn't at me. It was at Mommy. Dr. Henson. What was he saying? Claire. He said she was making things up. That she was lying about what I remembered. Dr. Henson. Do you think he was right? Claire. I don't know. Dr. Henson. What do you remember, Claire? Long silence. Claire. I remember her telling me not to say anything. Dr. Henson. About what? Claire. About the night he hit the wall. About the crying. About the bruises. Dr. Henson. Whose bruises? Claire. Mine. I hit pause. My hands were shaking. I didn't remember any bruises. I didn't remember any of that. But the therapist clearly believed I did, which meant either I had repressed it or someone had implanted the memory. And I knew which one it was. Because my mother didn't just gaslight my father. She gaslit me. She turned therapy into performance. She coached me, fed me lines, made me recite stories I couldn't fully understand until they became real in my mind. It wasn't until I pulled out one last paper from the box that everything snapped into place. A handwritten letter. To whom it may concern. If anything ever happens to me, I want it known that David Miller never harmed me or Claire. Any claims to the contrary were made under duress, constructed through psychological suggestion, and do not reflect reality. My name is Margaret N. Miller, and this is my final confession. No date, no signature, no witnesses. But it was her handwriting. For a long moment I just stared at it. If it was real, she had tried to make peace. If it wasn't, she had left one more trap. I didn't know what to believe. Only that the truth was more twisted than I ever imagined, and that whatever came next, I had to be ready. It started with the name. Dr. Henson, the therapist from the tape. I couldn't stop thinking about his voice, calm, guiding, too careful. Like someone walking a child through a burning house without letting her know it was on fire. My first instinct was to look him up online. But there were no public listings. No psychology license under that name in the state registry. He was either retired or hiding. So I did what I always did when the digital trail went cold. I turned to paper. I went back to the basement. My mother's filing system hadn't changed in decades. Gray metal cabinets, manila folders, precise tabs labeled church donations, tax documents, medical logs. She archived every detail of our lives like she was preparing for a trial. But she underestimated me. It took hours, but I found it, buried in a folder marked Wellness Logs, Claire. Inside was a business card. Dr. Paul Henson, Ph.D. Child Development and Memory Integration Therapy. 241 Creekside Avenue, Belmont. Office closed 2008. And a sticky note on the back. Cash only.
No transcripts.
I drove to the address the next morning. It was a small ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood, about an hour away. The front lawn was overgrown. The mailbox was taped shut, but the doorbell still worked. A long pause, then shuffling. Finally, the door creaked open. A man in his 70s stood there, thin, stooped, with watery eyes behind thick glasses. He blinked at me. "Yes, Dr. Henson?" I asked. He hesitated. "Who's asking?" "My name is Claire Miller." That name clearly meant something. His jaw tightened. "I was a patient," I said. "In 2002. My mother, Margaret Miller, brought me to you. I found your recordings." His eyes searched my face. Then he opened the door wider.
Come in.
The house was quiet and smelled like dust and coffee. Books lined every wall. Notebooks, too. Journals stacked in uneven piles. He motioned for me to sit on the old couch while he settled into an armchair across from me. "I don't practice anymore," he said flatly. "Haven't in over 15 years. Because of her?" I asked. Another pause. "She ruined lives," he said. "Yours. Your father's. Almost mine." I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I tried," he said. "But she was persuasive. She filed a formal complaint, accused me of planting memories, gaslighting her daughter. The board dropped the case, but the damage was done. Clients vanished overnight. I lost my license the next year." He shook his head slowly. "But she had already done worse to you." I pulled the recorder from my bag and pressed play. He listened in silence to the session 3 tape. At the mention of the bruises, he leaned forward. "You didn't have bruises," he said firmly. I checked. Repeatedly. Every session. "She told me I did." "She told me you did," he corrected. "Then kept you out of school for weeks. Said you needed private instruction." I should have walked away sooner. But I stayed because I thought I could undo what she was doing to you. He looked haunted, like a man who had watched something awful unfold but had been too paralyzed to stop it. "You can help undo it now," I said. "Tell me what really happened."
So he did.
He told me how my mother had claimed my father was abusing us both, that she wanted me to undergo memory integration therapy to uncover suppressed trauma. He explained how she sat in on sessions, coached my answers, brought in pages of her own notes, and demanded they be read into my record as Claire's voice. "She treated it like a performance," he said bitterly. "You were a prop." He told me how he tried to intervene, how he contacted a child welfare representative. But the file disappeared. No one followed up. Of course not. Because my mother was connected. The church, the hospital board, the therapy council. She sat on them all. By the time I left, Dr. Henson had given me something unexpected. A flash drive, labeled Personal Log CM Sessions. "These weren't official," he said. "Just my private thoughts. Journal entries I kept after each session. In case you ever came looking." I held it in my palm like it was glass. "Thank you," I whispered. He didn't respond. He just nodded, like a man finally exhaling after holding his breath for 2 decades. I drove home in silence. No music, no radio, just my thoughts, and the roaring pressure of too many realizations crashing down at once. My mother hadn't just rewritten our history. She had built an entire institutional lie around it. And too many people, therapists, teachers, family, friends, either looked away, stayed silent, or played along. Because she was powerful, and I was small. That night, I opened the flash drive. The first journal entry was dated October 20th, 2002, a day after the session number 4 tape. Claire asked today if she was really bad inside. Her mother didn't flinch. She told her yes, that we all are, that only through obedience can we be cleansed. Claire didn't cry. She nodded. smiled. Like she believed it. Like she had heard it so many times it was already stitched into her bones. I've never felt more helpless in my life. I closed the laptop and pressed my hands against my face. It wasn't just that she manipulated me. It was that she taught me to police myself, to doubt my own instincts, to fear the part of me that asked questions. I stayed up past 2 a.m. printing pages from the drive, cataloging every quote, every note, every date. I created a new folder titled Undeniable, because that's what I needed. Not just the truth, but proof. Proof that I could bury the lie once and for all. Her name was Sister Marianne. Every Sunday of my childhood, she stood 2 rows behind us in the pews, Bible pressed against her chest like a shield. Always watching, always smiling, always agreeing with whatever my mother said about scripture, about discipline, about me. When I was 12, she gave me a Bible verse on a sticky note. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?
I didn't understand it then.
Now I knew exactly what she meant. She'd been my mother's echo. But worse, she'd been her enabler. And I was ready to see her again. She lived in a modest retirement complex on the edge of town, one of those beige, nondescript buildings that smelled like potpourri and sadness. I called ahead, pretending to be a volunteer from the church. When she opened the door, she looked almost the same. Gray bun, sharp eyes, lips pressed in that familiar pious smile. "Claire Miller," she said with a hint of surprise.
Well,
"Aren't you a ghost from the past?" "I'm here about my father," I said, skipping the pleasantries. She stepped aside to let me in, her smile never faltering. That's a name I haven't heard in years. Her living room was filled with lace doilies, porcelain angels, and faded photos of people who probably didn't visit anymore. She offered me tea, which I declined. "I know my mother lied about him," I said, sitting on the edge of her floral couch. "I have evidence now. Therapy recordings. Letters. A confession she wrote before she got sick." She stirred her tea slowly. "I always wondered if you'd come asking someday. Then let's stop dancing. Why did you help her?" Sister Marian looked at me like I was a confused child. Because she was right. I felt my fists clench. She wasn't right.
she was sick.
Controlling. She fabricated abuse, isolated us, and forced me to parrot her lies. You knew it. You had to. She believed in structure, Marianne said calmly. And she believed your father threatened it. Because he protected me. Because he encouraged you to question her. To think for yourself. She set her teacup down. That kind of rebellion starts young. She was only trying to stop it. By gaslighting a child, she smiled sadly. You say gaslighting. We said discipline. My throat tightened. You kept her secrets, I said. All of them. Marianne tilted her head slightly, as if weighing her next words. Margaret believed truth was something to be curated. Like a garden. You don't let weeds grow. You pull them, even if they look like flowers. I stood up. You were a weed killer then. I was her gardener. I started toward the door, then paused. Where did my father go? I asked. She told everyone he abandoned us, that he was unstable. But that's not what happened, is it? Marianne didn't answer. Instead, she walked over to a side table, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old envelope. She handed it to me without meeting my eyes. Inside was a photograph of my father, in a hospital bed, unshaven,
Dazed.
and a note written in my mother's handwriting. St. Augustine Mental Wellness Center. Temporary custody assumed by state. Do not contact. I looked up at her, stunned. You institutionalized him, I whispered. Your mother did. You let her. I didn't stop her, Marianne admitted. Which might be the same thing. The file was dated 3 months after he left. Which meant for all those years I believed he'd abandoned me. He'd been locked away. Alone. Possibly medicated. With no one to visit him. No one to fight for him. No one except me.
But I didn't know.
Because she made sure I wouldn't. I want everything, I said. Any copies you kept. Letters. Phone numbers. Records. If you're trying to earn some kind of absolution before you die, this is your shot. Marianne's jaw tightened, but after a moment, she nodded. She went into the back room and returned with a file folder. Inside were copies of court transcripts sealed, 3 letters from my father, never sent, a psychologist's note indicating coercive guardianship, and a visitor's log with no entries under my name. My mother had removed me from his approved contact list. I was legally not allowed to visit my own father. You can go now, Marianne said, suddenly cold. But before I left, I turned back to face her. You know what the real tragedy is? I said. You think this was about faith, about obedience. But it wasn't. It was about fear. I saw it then in her eyes. Just for a second. Not regret, but terror. Because she knew I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to burn down the version of the story she helped write. That night, I scanned everything, sent copies to 3 different lawyers, and filed a Freedom of Information request for my father's old case.
There were still gaps,
but fewer now, and they were closing fast, because now I knew he didn't leave. He didn't abandon me. He was taken, and I was going to make sure everyone who helped make that happen answered for it. The day I finally found him, the sky was heavy and gray, hanging low like a curtain ready to fall. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter as I pulled up to the cold, foreboding building surrounded by barbed wire fences and steel gates. The mental health facility looked nothing like a place of healing. It was more like a fortress, sterile, unwelcoming, and distant. In my hand, I clutched the thick folder Marianne had given me, the papers inside feeling heavier than any weight I'd ever carried before. Each sheet was a link in the chain that had held my father captive for years, and by extension, kept me trapped in a prison of unanswered questions. Inside, the receptionist was polite but distant, the kind of politeness that felt rehearsed and hollow. I handed her my ID, proof of kinship, and the court orders granting me visitation rights. After a long pause, a nurse arrived, her expression unreadable as she led me down the winding corridors, past white walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and forgotten memories. We stopped at a small, dimly lit room with a window overlooking the grounds. I sat down, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure the man inside would hear it. And then I saw him, David Miller, my father, the man whose absence had shaped every fear, every shadow, and every lie I'd been forced to live with. He looked fragile. His once dark hair had turned to wisps of gray. His eyes, the same deep, dark eyes I remembered from childhood photos, were clouded, distant. Time and isolation had carved lines into his face, lines I never wanted to see. He didn't recognize me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "Dad." His gaze flicked up, searching my face like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his life uninvited. "I'm Claire," I whispered, voice trembling. "Your daughter." There was a flicker in his eyes, a brief moment when I thought he might remember, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "I don't remember," he said softly, his voice frail but steady. Tears pricked my eyes, but I swallowed them back. This wasn't the reunion I had dreamed of. The man in front of me was a ghost, a shadow of the father I knew, shadowed by years of medication, loneliness, and the relentless fog of a mind that had been trapped for too long. "How long have you been here?" I asked gently. "Too long," he replied, his voice barely more than a whisper. He told me about the endless days inside those walls, days filled with bright white rooms, blank faces, and the hum of machines. Nights haunted by nightmares, voices that whispered lies and told him he was worthless. How he was trapped inside a body that no longer felt like his own, a mind that betrayed him every waking moment. I wanted to scream, wanted to shake him awake from this living nightmare. But instead, I reached out and held his hand, tracing the delicate veins like a lifeline. "We're going to fix this," I promised him. The weight of reality slammed into me. This wasn't just about uncovering lies or confronting the darkness of my past anymore. It was about rebuilding a life, his life, my life, shattered into 1,000 broken pieces. The fight was just beginning. Leaving the facility, rain started to fall, slow, steady drops that felt like the world wept with me. As the water soaked my coat and ran down the windshield, a fragile seed of hope began to take root inside my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone in this fight. The coming weeks were a blur of doctors, lawyers, and paperwork. I learned the brutal truth. My mother had had him committed under false pretenses, using her influence to erase him from our lives. The system had been complicit, turning a blind eye to the abuse of power. But the biggest shock came when I uncovered the extent of his treatment: drugs that dulled his mind, therapies that didn't heal but controlled, and isolation that broke him piece by piece. Visiting him became the only thing that kept me grounded. Slowly, over quiet afternoons and shared silences, I watched glimmers of the man I once knew flicker through the haze. Sometimes a faint smile, sometimes a stubborn refusal to give up. One afternoon, as the sun fought its way through the clouds, he squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you're here," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed we could fight back against the darkness. But not everyone wanted me to succeed. Whispers followed me, threats veiled thinly as warnings. Phone calls that ended in silence. My car keyed in the parking lot. A sense of being watched wrapped around me like a cold cloak. I knew my mother's allies were still out there, guarding the lies she'd spun so carefully. One night, returning from a visit, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. "Stop digging. Some stones are better left unturned." The message was clear. They wanted me to walk away. But I couldn't.
Not now.
Not when the truth was so close. I poured every ounce of strength I had into fighting for my father's freedom and my own identity. I hired private investigators, reached out to advocacy groups, and spoke to journalists willing to listen. Every step forward felt like walking through fire. But the fire burned away the fear and doubt, lighting a path toward justice. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened a box filled with old letters, the ones my father had written but never sent. His words were raw, filled with pain and hope, a man desperate to reach out across the void. Reading them, I realized that our story was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming a stolen life. The road ahead was long and uncertain. But I wasn't the scared child anymore. I was a woman armed with the truth. And this time, I would not be silenced. Even after my father's release, the shadows didn't lift. They followed me like a dark cloud, thick and suffocating. The moment he walked out of that hospital, fragile but free, I thought the nightmare was over. But I was wrong. The real battle began. It started with whispers, faint, distant at first, then closer, then sharp and cutting. "Why dig up the past?" some would ask with a forced smile. Others sent veiled threats, hiding behind fake names and anonymous numbers. One night, my phone buzzed repeatedly. No caller ID. When I finally answered, there was silence. Then a slow, deliberate click. I knew. Someone was watching. At home, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow became a threat. I installed cameras, changed locks, told a few trusted friends what was happening. But fear isn't just about physical danger. It's the weight on your chest when no one believes you, when every word you say can be twisted and turned against you. The police took my report seriously, but without proof, they were powerless. And the people who wanted to bury the truth? They were patient. They were powerful. They had time on their side. One afternoon, I met with a lawyer who specialized in cases like ours. She looked me in the eye and said, "Claire, you're going up against a fortress. Your mother's network didn't just disappear when she did. These people will stop at nothing." I nodded. I knew that. But I also knew I couldn't back down. At the same time, my father was struggling. The years in that cold facility had changed him. Sometimes he was lucid and full of warmth. Other times, he was distant, confused, shadows flickering behind his eyes. One day, while we were sitting quietly in the garden, he grabbed my hand tightly. "They tried to break me," he said, voice shaking. "But they didn't succeed. Not completely." Tears welled up, but I smiled. We had each other. Despite everything, there were moments of light. Noah, my son, became my anchor. His laughter, his innocent questions, reminded me why I had to fight. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up and said, "Mommy, will the bad people go away?" I kissed his forehead. "Yes, baby, they will." But inside, I knew the fight was far from over. Weeks turned into months. The pressure mounted. Then, the breaking point. One rainy night, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was destroyed. But on my kitchen table, I found a single item, an old, faded photograph of my mother, her eyes cold and hard, and a message written in sharp, jagged letters. "Stop now or lose everything." The threat was clear, but so was my resolve. If they wanted war, they would have it. Because I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my father's dignity, my son's future, and the truth that had been buried too long. The next day, I called my lawyer. "We need to take this to the press," I said firmly. "People need to know." She hesitated. "Are you ready for that kind of exposure? It will change everything." "I don't care," I said. "The world deserves to know what happened." That night, as I lay in bed, the rain tapping softly against the window, I realized something. The past may have cast a long shadow, but shadows only exist where there is light. And I was ready to shine. The days after I went public with my father's story were a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, fear, hope, all tangled up into one overwhelming storm. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The media picked up the story quickly. Headlines screamed about a mother's betrayal, a father lost in the system, and a daughter fighting for justice. Interviews, calls from strangers, messages flooding my inbox. Some supportive, others filled with skepticism or hostility. At first, it felt like a victory. The spotlight was on the truth at last. But soon, I realized how much darker the shadows could get when exposed to light. My mother's allies retaliated. Anonymous articles surfaced online, twisting facts, painting me as the villain. Old family friends called, some with sympathy, others cold and distant. The community I once knew felt like a battlefield. One evening, my phone rang just as I was putting Noah to bed. The voice on the other end was calm but chilling. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Claire?" the voice said. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling around the receiver. But I refused to back down. I dug deeper, uncovering more about my mother's manipulations, forged documents, bribed officials, lies told to the very people who were supposed to protect us. Every revelation was a jagged shard, cutting deeper into the facade she'd built. Meanwhile, my father's health fluctuated. Some days, his mind was sharp, memories flooding back like sunlight breaking through clouds. Other days, confusion took hold, and he retreated into silence. One afternoon, he surprised me by recalling a name, a person who had helped him during his darkest times in the facility. A nurse who had defied orders, who had tried to get him help. I decided to find her. Tracking down the nurse led me to a small town several hours away. When I met her, she was hesitant but kind. Her eyes held the weight of secrets, and her voice was low. "I always believed Mr. Miller was innocent," she said. "But there were forces at work bigger than me. People who didn't want him to get better." Her testimony became a turning point. It exposed cracks in the system and gave us new hope for justice. Back home, the threats escalated. My car was vandalized, tires slashed. Strange cars parked near my house, people watching from shadows. No one noticed my growing paranoia. One night, after a particularly tense visit to my father, I broke down. The weight of everything, the lies, the danger, the fear, pressed down until I couldn't breathe. Noah hugged me tightly. "Mommy, you're strong. We'll get through this." His words gave me strength. I realized this fight wasn't just mine. It was for my son, for my father, and for the truth that demanded to be heard. I gathered every piece of evidence, every testimony, and prepared for the legal battle ahead. It was going to be long, painful, and exhausting. But I was ready. The courtroom became a battleground where the past clashed with the present. My mother's web of deceit unraveled slowly but surely. Witnesses testified. Documents were presented. The truth shone through cracks in the lies. In those moments, I saw my father's eyes light up, a flicker of the man he once was, and a glimpse of the future he deserved. When the verdict finally came, it wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reclamation of dignity, of justice long delayed. My mother was held accountable, not just for what she did to my father, but for the lies that nearly destroyed us all. Walking out of the courthouse, rain began to fall gently, a cleansing rain, washing away years of pain and fear. I held Noah's hand tightly and looked up at the sky. The shadows had lifted. And finally, I was free. The courtroom victory felt like a miracle, but the real work was only beginning. Justice didn't magically heal scars, and freedom didn't erase years of broken trust. My father, fragile yet resilient, was finally home. But the house we returned to was filled with silence, echoes of memories both beautiful and painful. I spent hours helping him navigate the simplest things, remembering to take his medication, relearning old routines, and reconnecting with the world outside those cold walls. At the same time, I was rebuilding my own life. Noah's laughter filled the rooms again, weaving warmth into the corners that had grown cold. But the past lingered like a ghost, refusing to be forgotten. One afternoon, as I sifted through old family photos, a wave of emotions crashed over me. Images of a happier time, birthdays, vacations, smiles, stood in stark contrast to the darkness we had endured. I realized that forgiveness wouldn't come easily. Not for my mother, not for the pain she caused. But for me, for my father, for Noah, healing was necessary. I reached out to a therapist who specialized in trauma and family betrayal. At first, it felt strange to talk openly about things I'd buried deep inside. But slowly, I began to unravel the knots of fear and anger that had bound me. Therapy wasn't a quick fix. Some days were harder than others. Memories surfaced uninvited. Doubt crept in like a shadow. But I held on to hope. One evening, as Noah slept, my father and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The colors bled across the sky, fiery reds and gentle purples, a reminder that even after darkness, light returns. He turned to me, his voice soft but sure.
"Thank you," he said,
"for not giving up." Tears welled up again, but this time they were different. Tears of relief, of love, of a future rebuilt. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was ready. For my father, for Noah, and for myself. Because sometimes, the darkest storms bring the brightest dawns. The months that followed the trial were both exhausting and strangely peaceful. The court's decision brought closure, but the real challenge was learning how to live beyond the fight, to rebuild trust, find joy, and heal wounds that ran deep. My father, once a prisoner of a broken system and a twisted past, was slowly reclaiming his life. We established routines, morning coffee on the porch, quiet afternoons reading old books, visits from neighbors who had kept silent but hopeful all these years. But the most profound change was in me. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a warrior. Noah, my shining light, continued to grow and thrive. His laughter echoed through the house, his curious questions a reminder that life moves forward, even when shadows linger. One evening, as I watched him chase fireflies in the backyard, I realized something important. The scars we carry do not define us. What defines us is the strength to keep moving forward, no matter the pain. I began volunteering at a local support group for families affected by abuse and mental health struggles. Sharing my story, listening to others, I found a new purpose, turning pain into healing, darkness into light. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet, I thought about my mother, the woman who had caused so much damage, the woman I was learning to forgive, even if from afar. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing her actions. It was about freeing myself from the chains of anger and resentment. As the seasons changed, so did we. The house felt warmer. The laughter came easier. The future, once clouded by fear, now sparkled with possibility. I stood on the porch one crisp autumn morning, the sun casting golden light over the trees. My father beside me, Noah playing nearby. I felt a quiet strength settle in my chest, a promise that no matter what came next, we would face it together. Because sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the most beautiful new beginnings.